The galaxy was silent except for the faint hum of distant stars and the crackle of dying signals traveling through the void. The Zelthar Dominion, once proud and vast, had fallen into despair. Their fleets, once symbols of unity and power, were now shattered remnants drifting across burned skies. Entire planets had gone dark, cities erased from existence, and the survivors who managed to flee carried only one message across the stars: a desperate call for help. Their enemy, the Vornak swarm, was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. They were not conquerors who sought land or power. They were living storms made of flesh and metal that consumed everything in their path. No diplomacy could stop them. No weapon had been enough to destroy them, and no alliance had lasted long against their endless advance. The Dominion tried for years to push them back, but every battle ended the same way, with screams, silence, and another world lost. Far away, in a quiet corner of the Milky Way, humanity had been watching. Earth had changed over the centuries. Wars and struggles had once nearly destroyed it, but the survivors had rebuilt stronger, united under a common goal: to never let destruction take their home again. They had learned from every war, every failure, and every mistake. From that knowledge, they built fleets of ships capable of defending not just Earth, but any world that might face what they once did. Their armadas were not built for conquest or pride. They were made to protect. For years, those fleets remained silent, patrolling near the edges of human space, never interfering with the conflicts of other species. Humanity had chosen peace, but peace built on the readiness to fight when there was no other choice. Then the message arrived. It was weak, filled with static, but it carried one phrase that reached deep into the human heart: "We are dying. Please, if anyone hears us, help us." The transmission came from a Dominion colony world located near the edge of known space. The images attached to the signal showed burning skies, broken ships, and the unmistakable form of the Vornak swarm. Scientists analyzed the data and confirmed the truth. The Vornaks were spreading faster than predicted. If left unchecked, they would soon reach human borders. The Terran Council gathered in the orbital city of New Geneva to decide their response. The chamber was filled with tension. Some argued that humanity should stay neutral. They said the Vornaks were not their problem, that interfering would only draw attention to Earth. Others disagreed, reminding everyone that Earth once stood on the brink of extinction too. One commander said that if humanity ignored this plea, they would be no better than those who once turned away from them. The debate lasted through the night, but in the end a single statement silenced the room: "If we do nothing, we become the same as the monsters who watch while others burn." The vote passed. The decision was final. Humanity would not stand by. Within hours, the order went out. Every major shipyard came alive with energy. Crews ran across decks, engineers fueled engines, and pilots prepared their ships. Massive orbital dry docks released battle cruisers one by one. The United Terran Armada was being assembled for war. These ships were not like those of other races. Each was a fusion of human ingenuity and artificial intelligence, their systems linked together by the Terran Net, a battle network that allowed them to act with perfect coordination. The fleet was a living force guided by both human courage and machine precision. In command of the Armada was Admiral Hale, a veteran of countless conflicts. He had seen what war could do, had seen cities turn to dust, and swore he would never allow that fate to fall upon another world if he could prevent it. When he received the activation order, he simply nodded and said, "Understood." No speeches were needed. Everyone in that room knew what was at stake. Across human colonies, the news spread like wildfire. For the first time in decades, humanity was going to war beyond its own borders. Families gathered to watch as the ships rose from Earth's orbit, their engines lighting up the night sky. Children pointed and cheered, not yet understanding the danger, while parents stood silent, proud but fearful. Humanity had always been divided, but now they were united by a single purpose: to protect life itself. When the fleet finally left Earth's orbit, the sight was beyond words. Thousands of ships formed lines across the blackness of space. Their hulls gleamed silver and blue, marked with the emblem of the Terran Alliance. The flagship TSV Resolute led the way, its engines burning brighter than any star nearby. As the countdown began, every crew member on every ship stood at their stations, hearts racing. Then the command came: "Initiate jump." Space folded around them as jump drives roared to life. The stars stretched and vanished, replaced by a swirling tunnel of blue light. For most of them, it was their first jump into unknown territory. But there was no fear, only determination. Humanity had faced extinction before and survived. This time they would ensure others did too. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace near the Dominion system, the view that greeted them was horrifying. The planet below was covered in fire. The orbital defenses were gone, and the last of the Dominion ships were being torn apart by massive living creatures shaped like ships, but made of bone and energy. The Vornax swarm moved in perfect unity, each vessel pulsing like part of a giant organism. The human fleet watched in silence for only a moment before Admiral Hale spoke a single order. "Engage!" Instantly the void came alive. Railguns fired first, launching tungsten slugs at impossible speed. The kinetic rounds hit the Vornax with the force of small suns. Missiles followed, each guided by AI to strike weak points identified by sensors. Laser batteries traced glowing lines through the dark, slicing through enemy formations. The human ships moved in perfect formation, each one covering the other. Each strike calculated, no motion wasted. It was not chaos like most battles. It was precision. It was art. The Vornax tried to adapt. They shifted their forms, hardening their armor, regenerating limbs and launching organic projectiles back at the human fleet. But humanity's defenses were ready. Energy shields flared and absorbed the hits, while smaller interceptors weaved between the larger ships, intercepting attacks before they landed. The Dominion survivors could hardly believe what they were seeing. They had fought for years and lost every battle. But in minutes, the humans turned the tide. From the surface of the dying planet, survivors watched as the black sky lit up with blue fire. They saw human ships move through the darkness like guardians from ancient myths. For the first time in years, they dared to hope. Hours passed, though to those watching it felt like eternity. Slowly, the Vornax formations began to break. Their signals grew erratic as their command structures collapsed. The humans pressed forward relentless, giving no chance for the enemy to recover. The flagship's main weapon, a rail accelerator capable of piercing planetary crusts, charged and fired. The shockwave tore through the Vornax core ship, splitting it in two. The remaining swarm scattered, trying to flee, but human ships pursued. When the last Vornax ship exploded, the silence that followed was deafening. The battle was over. Humanity had arrived and the enemy was gone. The Dominion survivors sent cautious signals to the fleet, unsure if the humans would respond. A calm voice replied, "This is the Terran United Fleet. You are safe now." The rescue operations began immediately. Human medics were dispatched to damaged Dominion ships. Supplies were shared freely. Engineers worked side by side with alien technicians to restore power and communications. For the survivors, it was unreal. They had sent a call for help expecting nothing, and instead an entire armada had come. As the human fleet orbited the broken world, Admiral Hale stood at the command deck window, watching the debris drift by. He knew this was only the beginning. The Vornax would not stop with one defeat. They would regroup somewhere else, and humanity would have to be ready again. But for that moment, they had saved a world. They had kept a promise they never made but always carried in their hearts, to never let darkness win while they still had strength. Far below, on the surface of the planet, a group of survivors looked up at the sky. One of them whispered a single sentence that spread across the galaxy in the years to come. When the void called for help, the humans answered. And so began the legend of humanity's Armada, the fleet that entered the war zone and wiped the enemy from existence. It was not the beginning of war. It was the beginning of a new hope that no one in the galaxy would ever forget. The battle had ended, but the silence that followed was heavy and strange, as if the stars themselves were waiting to see what humanity would do next. The Terran fleet drifted slowly above the ruined planet. Their engines humming softly against the emptiness below them lay the shattered surface where the Dominion survivors were still trying to understand what had happened. They had been certain that they were doomed. They had prepared to die under the claws of the Vornax, and yet, here they were alive, staring up at ships they had never seen before. The flagship TSV Resolute hovered in the center of the fleet, its vast hull glowing faintly as repair drones worked to patch small impacts and minor burns from the battle inside the command. Deck Admiral Hale stood watching the planet through the observation window, his face calm but his thoughts heavy. He had seen war before. He had seen what destruction did to people and to worlds. But this was different. He knew that what had happened Here would echo across the galaxy. The communications officer approached him with a report the Dominion survivors were trying to contact them. Hale gave a single nod. The signal came through, showing the tired faces of alien leaders whose eyes still carried fear and confusion. They asked why the humans had come, why they would fight for strangers. Hale's reply was simple. He said they had called for help, and that humanity had heard them. There was no grand speech, no promise of alliance, just a statement of fact that was enough for now. Across the fleet, crews were busy. The hangar bays were filled with activity engineers repairing ships, medics treating rescued survivors, and drones collecting the remains of Vornax organisms for study. On the medical decks, Dominion refugees were being treated with care. They were weak and malnourished, but the humans offered them food, water, and medical aid. Without hesitation, some of the survivors wept, not just from relief, but from disbelief. They had never imagined that another species would come so far only to save them. As the hours passed, more information came in about the battle. The analysts confirmed that the Vornax had been completely wiped out in this sector. The swarm's command structure was destroyed and no signals were detected beyond the system. But the scientists were cautious. They warned that the Vornax were known to spread through hidden spores and dormant bioships. Hale listened carefully. He ordered immediate scanning of the surrounding systems. He would not allow a single remnant of the swarm to survive. The crew worked tirelessly, mapping every corner of space within the system. Human drones moved like silent hunters, scanning debris fields and energy trails. What they found disturbed everyone deep in the wreckage of the Vornax fleet. They discovered something massive, a biological core still pulsing with faint energy. The scientists brought it aboard under heavy containment and began to study it. The readings showed it was some kind of hive brain, a living control node that had directed the swarm during battle. It was dying, but it was still alive. When the researchers connected their instruments to it, the thing began to communicate. Not through words, but through signals, patterns of light and sound that formed strange repeating messages. It was trying to adapt to the human systems, trying to understand them. The lead scientist watched in silence as the reading stabilized, and then a single pattern repeated over and over, a warning. The creature was transmitting a message that translated roughly to, "We are not the only swarm." Hale heard the report and felt a cold unease settle in his chest. While the scientists debated what it meant, Hale gathered his officers for a briefing. The holographic display showed maps of nearby regions and possible paths the Vornax could have used to travel. The more they studied it, the clearer it became that the swarm was not an isolated threat. There were more of them scattered across unknown parts of space, growing, feeding, waiting. If humanity had not intervened, the entire galaxy might have been consumed within decades. The officers discussed their next move. Some argued they should return to Earth and prepare the defense. Others said they should strike now while the enemy was disorganized. Hale listened quietly before making his decision. They would not abandon the Dominion they had come to help, and they would see it through. He ordered the fleet to stay in the system until every trace of the Vornax was gone and the survivors were safe. He also sent a secure message back to Earth requesting reinforcements and supplies. The Dominion leaders were still in shock, but they began to understand what the humans were doing. They offered to share what little they had left in gratitude. Though their worlds were broken, they wanted to help rebuild. Hale accepted their cooperation with quiet respect. Together, the humans and Dominion engineers began restoring the planet's atmosphere stabilizers, rebuilding communication satellites, and reactivating orbital stations that had been silent for years. In the following days, something changed between the two species. At first, the Dominion were afraid of the humans. Their machines, their weapons, their silence during battle had seemed cold and inhuman. But as they worked side by side, they saw the truth behind the steel. Humanity was not heartless. Their strength came from compassion. They repaired homes, they treated the wounded. They shared food with alien children and listened to the stories of those who had lost everything. One night on the surface of the planet, a group of Dominion citizens gathered to watch the sky, where the Terran fleet shone like a string of stars. A young child pointed and asked what those lights were. The elder beside him replied that they were the guardians who had come from far away to keep them safe. The humans heard that story through their translators, and it spread through the fleet, bringing quiet pride to those who fought so hard. But peace did not mean rest. Hale knew that the message from the dying Vornak's brain meant something larger. He met with the lead scientist again to review the new findings. The creature's cells were unlike anything they had seen before. It contained fragments of genetic code from dozens of species, suggesting that the swarm consumed and assimilated whatever it found to evolve faster. It was not just a predator. It was a living weapon designed to adapt endlessly. The scientists feared that it could rebuild itself even from the smallest fragment. The fleet began a deep scan of the planet's crust to make sure no spores or hidden pods had survived. The battle they found traces of Vornak's material deep underground, frozen in old tunnels from the first attack. The ground teams moved in carefully, burning the tunnels and neutralizing every piece they could find. After days of work, they confirmed the planet was clean for the first time in years. It was truly safe. When the cleanup was complete, the Dominion leaders asked the humans what would happen next. Hale told them humanity would help them rebuild and then move on to find the source. Of the swarm, he said the Terran fleet did not fight for reward or territory. They fought so that no world would face the same fate again. Those words were recorded and later broadcast across the stars. They reached distant colonies and hidden systems, where other civilizations listened in awe and disbelief. Back on Earth, the news of victory spread quickly. The images of the battle reached every screen across human space. People watched the footage of burning ships and the massive fleet moving through the stars, and for the first time in generations they felt pride. Not the pride of conquest, but of purpose. Humanity had become more than survivors. They had become protectors, and even those who had doubted the mission now stood behind it. Weeks later, as the fleet prepared to leave orbit, the planet below had begun to heal. Green returned to its surface, oceans shimmered again, and the sky cleared from ash. The Dominion built a monument on the surface made from the remains of their old ships. They called it the Wall of Light. On it, they engraved words in their language, meaning they came from the blue star and brought hope. Hale visited the site before departure. Standing in silence before the monument, the Dominion leaders thanked him and his crew for saving their world. He simply nodded and said that humanity only did what was right. When the fleet finally departed, the skies glowed once more as thousands of engines ignited. The people of the planet watched as the ships vanished into the stars, leaving behind trails of light that slowly faded. The Dominion citizens stood together in quiet reverence, for they knew that somewhere out there humanity still watched, and that if the darkness ever returned, those same lights would come again in the heart of the fleet. Admiral Hale stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring into the endless dark ahead. He knew their mission was far from over. The Vornaks were not gone, and the message from the dying hive still haunted his mind. There were more out there waiting, perhaps even stronger, perhaps even closer. The thought did not frighten him. It only strengthened his resolve. The galaxy had seen the power of humanity once, and it would see it again, not for domination, but for protection. As long as humans lived, they would answer every call for help that echoed through the stars. For this was what they were now, the guardians of the light in the endless dark. The fleet moved through the blackness of space like a storm of silver light, their engines glowing faintly as they traveled from one system to another, scanning the stars and searching for any sign of the Vornaks. Admiral Hale stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the endless dark outside the viewports. It had been several weeks since they had left the Dominion world behind, and though they had saved it, he could not rest. The message from the dying Vornaks creature still echoed in his mind. We are not the only swarm. Those words were more than a warning. They were a promise of what was coming. Every ship in the Terran fleet was now running high-level scans. The drones moved ahead like glowing insects, mapping regions of space where few had ever gone before. They found remains of old battles, drifting debris fields, and dead planets. Where the Vornaks had once fed, some worlds were only silent rocks now, their surfaces blackened and hollow. Others still showed traces of what they used to be, ruins buried in ash-broken cities frozen in time. The crews looked at the images and said nothing, because there were no words to describe what they felt. The scientists aboard the flagship worked day and night trying to understand how the Vornaks spread and why they attacked. The data from the last battle had revealed new details. The swarm moved not through normal space. but through biological tunnels made of living material that allowed them to cross huge distances faster than any known technology. The tunnels were temporary. They grew and died, leaving almost no trace that made them almost impossible to track, but the humans were determined to find a way. Hale knew that if they did not stop the Vornax now, they would return one day stronger and hungrier than before. The first clue came when a scout drone picked up a faint signal in a nearby system. It was a low-frequency pulse repeating every few seconds. It matched the energy pattern of Vornax life forms, but weaker. The fleet changed course and jumped toward the signal. When they arrived, they found a planet covered in thick green fog, orbiting a small dying sun. The readings showed massive amounts of organic material covering the surface. It was not a normal planet, it was alive. The fleet entered orbit, carefully sending smaller ships and probes to gather information. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. The entire planet was a breeding ground, a hive world. The surface was covered in thick layers of tissue pulsing slowly like a giant heart, and beneath it they detected movement. Thousands, maybe millions of life forms growing, feeding, and waiting. Hale listened to the report and then gave a quiet order. No one needed to ask what. It meant the humans had come too far to turn back. Now the first strike came from orbit railguns and plasma weapons opened fire, turning the sky above the planet into a storm of fire. The organic surface reacted immediately. It began to move and twist, forming massive living towers that reached up toward the fleet and launched organic projectiles that glowed red as they flew through the void. The human ships moved in formation, their shields flaring as they absorbed the hits. Smaller destroyers broke away to flank the towers, firing precision shots into their weak points. The explosions lit up the clouds in bright white flashes. Then the surface cracked open, and from the fissures rose shapes that no one had ever seen before. Enormous winged creatures larger than entire cities, their bodies covered in black plates of armor, and their mouths glowing with heat. They launched into the sky toward the fleet, moving faster than any biological being should the human fleet reacted instantly. Hundreds of fighter squadrons launched from the carriers. The small ships darted between the giant creatures, firing missiles and laser bursts. Each hit tore pieces from the monsters, but still they came roaring without sound in the vacuum of space. The flagship opened fire, its main gun charging for several seconds before releasing a single shot that split one of the creatures in half. The shockwave threw smaller ships off course, but the formation-held Admiral Hale gave calm orders, his voice steady though the chaos around him was deafening. The fleet moved together, each ship acting as one, no fear, no hesitation, only purpose. The battle lasted for hours, and the night sky burned brighter than the sun. By the time it ended, the planet below was no longer alive, it was ash and glass. When the shooting stopped, silence returned once again, but it was not peace. It was the quiet that comes after something terrible. The scientists scanned the planet and confirmed that every trace of the Vornax had been destroyed, but they also found something else buried deep under the surface, a structure made of unknown alloy, far older than the swarm. The material was not organic. It was metallic and radiated energy, unlike anything the humans had recorded. Before the structure was a perfect sphere buried kilometers deep. Hale ordered an exploration team to investigate. When the first human explorers reached the structure, they realized it was not a building but a vessel. It had been there for centuries, maybe thousands of years, buried and forgotten. The scientists managed to open a small part of its surface, and inside, they found a chamber filled with strange symbols and a single object that looked like a crystal, but pulsed faintly with light. When they activated their scanners, the crystal projected a holographic image of a star map, showing hundreds of systems connected by lines. Some were marked in red, and one of them matched the location of the destroyed Vornax world. It was a map of the swarm. The discovery sent shock through the fleet. The scientists worked quickly decoding the map and realized it showed more hive worlds scattered across the galaxy. The Vornax were not just a threat to one region. They were everywhere, sleeping, waiting to awaken. Hale stared at the map for a long time and then made his decision. They would not return to Earth, not yet. Humanity had started something and now they had to finish it. The order was simple. Transmit the data to the Terran Council and prepare for the next jump. The war was no longer about defense, it was about survival for everyone. As the fleet prepared to leave the destroyed planet behind, some of the crew gathered in the mess halls talking quietly about what they had seen. Some were afraid, others were angry, but all of them knew one thing: they could not stop now. They had witnessed what the Vornax did to worlds, and they would not allow it to happen again. A young pilot looked out the window at the burning surface below and said that maybe this was why humanity had been given such power, not to rule but to protect. Her words spread through the crew, lifting their spirits, even as the darkness ahead grew deeper. Far away on Earth, the Terran Council received the data and the news of the new threat. It caused panic among some leaders, but unity among others. The people of Earth had seen what their fleet could do, and now they knew that their fight was for the whole galaxy. Massive construction began across the solar system: new ships, new weapons, new technology. Humanity would not wait for the next attack. They would go to it before it reached anyone else. Back on the flagship, Hale stood alone in the observation deck, looking at the stars, each one shining like a small promise in the void. He thought about the people of Earth, about the Dominion survivors, about all the species that did not yet know that something was coming. He knew that what they had started would not end soon, and that many might die before it was over. But he also knew that humanity had found its purpose. Their ancestors once looked up at the stars with wonder. Now they looked with responsibility and strength. The order to jump came through. The fleet engines roared as blue light filled the viewports. The stars stretched once more as space bent around them. Humanity was moving again, deeper into the unknown, where danger waited, and where they would face it with the same courage that had brought them this far. No one spoke as the ships vanished into hyperspace, but everyone on board knew the truth. The war against the Vornax had only begun, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, for that was what it meant to be human, to see the darkness, and still move forward to protect not only themselves but every voice that cried for help across the stars. The fleet came out of hyperspace into a quiet part of the galaxy where the stars were dim and cold. The scanners stretched far, but found little, only the faint hum of empty space. The crew felt uneasy because silence after war never felt peaceful. Admiral Hale stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the holographic map before him, showing hundreds of systems glowing softly across the black. The data from the strange crystal they had found was still being studied. But one thing was clear: there were more hive worlds ahead, some active, some sleeping, each one a threat waiting to awaken. The crew had been traveling for weeks since the destruction of the last Vornax world, and though they had won, the cost was heavy. Many ships bore the marks of battle, their hulls scarred and their crews tired. The medics worked endlessly, treating both injuries and exhaustion, while the engineers fought to keep the systems running. But even with the fatigue, not a single person asked to turn back. They all knew what was at stake, and they trusted Hale to lead them wherever this war would go. In the science decks, the team studying the Vornax samples had made another discovery: the cells were reacting strangely to radiation from certain stars, changing form as if they were trying to adapt. The scientists believed that the swarm was not just alive, it was learning, evolving even after death. That meant every destroyed piece, every burned remnant could still pose a danger. They needed a way to end it completely. Hale listened to the report quietly before asking a simple question: how do we kill something that never stops changing? The scientists could not answer. Not yet. The fleet continued its search, and after several days they picked up another signal. It was weak and unstable, but it carried a pattern. The same pattern used by the old Dominion distress codes. Hale ordered the fleet to move toward it. When they arrived, they found a broken planet half consumed by organic growth. The remains of cities could still be seen, buried under layers of living matter. The signal came from one of the few structures still standing, a small research outpost surrounded by wreckage. The landing teams were sent down in armored shuttles, moving through thick clouds of green mist that clung to the ground. The air was heavy and foul. The smell of decay filled every breath. When they reached the outpost, they found signs of a desperate last stand. Scorch marks on the walls, shattered weapons scattered, floors covered in ash. But inside the command room they found something unexpected. A single Dominion survivor, weak and pale but alive. She looked at the humans with wide eyes, not believing they were real. She said she had been hiding for months, After the Vornax had taken her world, she told them that this planet had once been a research colony studying ancient ruins deep beneath the surface, and that the Vornax had come without warning. Their ships had fallen from the sky like meteors. Within hours, everything had been consumed. She had survived only because she hid in a containment chamber far below. When she heard that the humans had come, she began to cry, saying that she had thought no one would ever come for her. Hale spoke to her. Through the communication channel, his voice calm and steady. He promised that she was safe now. While the survivor was brought to the flagship, the science teams began scanning the ruins she had spoken of. What they found below the surface changed everything. There were structures similar to the metallic sphere found on the last world. Only this time there were many of them arranged in a pattern stretching for miles underground. The readings showed faint power signatures, still active. Hale realized they had found something ancient, something that might have existed long before both humans and Vornax. The excavation drones worked for hours, cutting through layers of hardened organic crust. When they finally broke through, they entered a vast chamber filled with giant metallic pillars, each one covered in strange symbols and lights that flickered weakly. The scientists believed it was a control network, a system designed to monitor or maybe create the Vornax. The evidence pointed to an origin not natural but artificial. Something or someone had made the swarm long ago and set it loose upon the galaxy. When the data was sent to Hale, he stared at it for a long time in silence. If the Vornax were a creation, then that meant their makers might still exist somewhere, or worse, they had left behind machines still producing new swarms. He ordered the scientists to extract everything they could from the ruins before destroying the site. No one argued. They had already seen what happened when such things were left behind. As the excavation continued, the Dominion survivor recovered slowly aboard the Resolute. Her name was Lyra, and she began to help the human scientists with her knowledge of the local system. She told them stories of old legends that spoke of beings called the architects who once shaped life itself and then vanished, leaving behind tools of creation and destruction. Some of the humans dismissed it as myth, but Hale listened carefully because myths often came from forgotten truths. While they worked to decode the symbols, the scanners detected movement beyond the system, a cluster of unknown signals approaching fast. The energy readings were unlike the Vornax, but still organic. The fleet went on alert, weapons charged and defenses raised when the ships finally appeared. They were small and worn, covered in marks of age. They identified themselves as vessels from the Olaran Republic, a nearby civilization that had been fighting the Vornax. On the other side of the sector, their commander hailed the Terran fleet, asking if the stories were true that humans had destroyed an entire swarm. Hale confirmed it. The Olaran captain explained that his people had been running from the Vornax for years, losing world after world. When he heard of the battle, he had come hoping to find help. Hale invited him aboard, and soon both commanders met face to face. They spoke for hours, sharing maps and data. The Olarans had seen things that confirmed what the humans suspected: the Vornax were spreading from multiple sources across the galaxy. The two fleets agreed to work together. Their combined strength would be greater, and their knowledge could help find the true origin of the swarm. When the Olaran ships joined formation beside the Terran vessels, the stars around them seemed to glow brighter, as if the galaxy itself took notice of what was happening for the first time in ages. Different species stood together, not in fear, but in unity, against a common enemy. As the joint fleet prepared for the next phase of their mission, Hale visited the Dominion survivor, who now served as translator between the humans and the Olarans. She asked him why humanity fought for others who were not their own. Hale said that long ago humanity had been alone, and others had turned away when they cried for help. They swore then that if they ever became strong enough, they would never let another voice go unheard. He said they fought because it was right, because someone had to stand between life and the dark. That night, the crew of the Resolute gathered in the observation hall, watching the twin fleets drift among the stars, their hulls shining like scattered moons. They knew the next battles would be harder. They had faced one swarm and won, but now they were going after the heart of something older and darker than any of them could imagine. The technicians spoke quietly. The pilots checked their ships one last time. The medics stocked their supplies. Everyone moved with purpose because they all knew there was no turning back now. Before the fleet left orbit, The humans placed a beacon on the surface of the ruined planet. It sent a single repeating message across the galaxy. A signal of warning and hope. It said this world was lost, but the fight continues and we will not stop until every shadow is gone. When the engines ignited, the fleet rose slowly, leaving behind the world of ruins and secrets. The stars stretched into long trails of light as the ships vanished into hyperspace. In the quiet that followed, the beacon continued to pulse in the darkness, its message traveling endlessly through the void, reaching distant worlds where people whispered of humanity, the strangers, from the blue world who had come from nowhere with fire and mercy in equal measure. And as the fleet moved toward the next unknown system, Admiral Hale looked out the window at the endless stars ahead and said softly to himself that they would not stop until the makers of the swarm were found and the galaxy was safe again. And in that moment he believed with all his heart that humanity could do it, because they had faced death before, and they were still here, still fighting, still human. The fleet traveled through the dark stretch of space for days without finding a single signal. The stars were distant and dim, and the silence pressed on every ship like a heavy weight. But no one complained. The humans and Olarans worked together, sharing supplies and information. They had become something new. A united force bound by purpose. Admiral Hale spent his days in the command center, studying the maps gathered from every ally world. The pattern showed that the Vornax swarms were not spreading randomly. They were moving in straight lines, forming circles around several points in the galaxy, as if protecting something hidden in the center. The scientists believed that this was where their origin lay, and Hale knew that they would have to go there no matter the cost. The crew of the flagship worked quietly through the endless cycles of day and night. The hum of engines and the steady beat of the scanners filled the air when they finally picked up a faint energy reading. It came from a dead zone. No stars, no planets, just a drifting field of metal and dust. At first they thought it was debris, but when the fleet moved closer, they saw the shape of something enormous, floating in the dark. It was not a ship or a station. It was something older, larger than anything built by humans or any known race. A circular structure with thousands of towers rising like frozen waves covered in black metal that reflected no light. The scanners could not penetrate its walls. Every signal came back distorted, as if the structure was alive. Hale gave the order to send a probe. The small craft drifted toward the massive object, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then a bright pulse shot from the structure, and the probe was gone. Not destroyed, just gone. Its signal vanished completely. The bridge went silent. Hale stood watching the empty space where the probe had been. He felt something cold move in his chest, and then he said, "They found it." This was the place where the Vornax were born. The Olaran ships moved to defensive positions, their commanders uneasy. One of them asked if they should retreat and study from afar, but Hale refused. He said that if this was the source, they could not risk letting it awaken again. They had to see what was inside. He ordered a small team of humans and Olarans to prepare for entry. The science teams equipped the shuttles with special shielding to resist the strange energy fields, and the soldiers prepared their weapons. None of them knew if they would come back, but not one refused to go. When the shuttles entered the structure, they passed through a wall of light that rippled like water, and suddenly they were inside a hollow sphere thousands of miles wide. The walls were covered in moving patterns of light like veins glowing faintly, as if something huge was sleeping beneath the surface. In the center of the sphere floated a black mass, slowly turning in the dark. It looked like liquid metal breathing and shifting. The sensors showed it had the same energy signature as the Vornax. It was their heart, their origin, their mother. The scientists recorded everything, while the soldiers kept watch. One of the Olaran officers said he could hear a low sound coming from the mass like a heartbeat. Hale listened through the channel and he heard it too slow, steady, endless. It seemed to echo through his chest. The lead scientist said that the structure might be a creation engine, something that used biological and mechanical matter to build living machines. If that was true, then this was where the first swarm was made. As the team studied the readings, a pulse of energy spread across the walls. The lights brightened, the surface began to move like skin waking from sleep. The heart of the Vornax was coming alive. Hale shouted for the teams to withdraw. But before they could reach the exit, the black mass split open and shapes began to emerge. They were not ships. They were creatures, enormous winged forms made of metal and flesh, their bodies twisted like fire in water. They moved with impossible speed, their eyes glowing with blue fire. The soldiers opened fire, but the creatures moved through the shots like smoke, tearing through the shuttles with claws and beams. Of light, Hale watched the screens as the feed filled with chaos, screams, static, and flashes of light. He called for reinforcements, but the signal was fading. He shouted for the fleet to open fire on the structure itself. The ships formed a circle around the massive sphere and began to unleash everything they had. Beams, missiles, plasma torpedoes, the darkness lit up like a star being born. The impact shook every vessel and waves of energy rolled through the void. For a moment it seemed to work. The outer walls began to crack, lines of white light spreading across the surface. But then the sphere released another pulse. This one brighter and stronger than before. Half the fleet systems went offline. Lights dimmed, engines stuttered, the gravity inside the ships flickered. Hale's voice echoed through the comms, telling everyone to stay calm, to hold formation, as engineers scrambled to reroute power. The Olaran ships began to drift, and one of them was caught in a sudden surge of light. The entire ship dissolved into dust without sound or flame. The humans refused to break. They kept firing using manual controls when the computers went dark. Their missiles tore through the weak points. The surface started to peel away, revealing a bright core like a small sun burning inside the sphere. The scientists shouted through the noise, saying that the core was unstable, and if it reached full energy, it would explode and spread the Vornax code across space. Hale understood instantly. They had to destroy it completely. Even if it meant losing everything, he ordered the fleet to prepare the Singularity Cannon, the most powerful weapon humanity had ever built. The cannon required enormous power. Every ship had to feed its energy into the flagship. The lights dimmed across the Armada. The engines slowed. The weapon core began to glow as it charged. The countdown started. The Vornax creatures swarmed toward the fleet, their bodies burning through shields and armor. But the humans held their ground. Fighters flew straight into the creatures, firing until their weapons overheated. When the countdown reached 0, Hale gave the final command. The beam fired a column of white light brighter than a star, piercing through the void, striking the core dead center. There was no sound, only light. Endless, blinding light spreading outward, consuming the sphere and everything around it. The scanners went blank. Then, one by one, the signals returned. The sphere was gone. The space where it had been was empty. Only dust and fragments floating silently. Hale leaned back in his chair, his hands trembling. He had destroyed the heart, but at a cost. Half the fleet was gone. The Olaran commander's ship was silent. No response. The humans, who survived, watched the wreckage drift by, knowing that many friends had been lost. The remaining ships regrouped slowly. The damage was heavy, but the crew worked together to restore power. The medics moved from deck to deck, helping the wounded. Hale walked through the corridors, watching his people still working. Even after the worst battle they had ever faced, he felt pride and sorrow mixed together. The scientists confirmed that the Vornax signal had stopped spreading. The swarm had lost its command, but they also warned that fragments of its code still existed, scattered across the stars, waiting to grow again someday. Hale stood before the window of the bridge, looking at the remains of the battlefield. He said softly that they had won this fight, but the war was not over yet. They would have to hunt down every last remnant and make sure nothing like this ever rose again. He sent a message to all ships, telling them that their fallen would be remembered and their fight would not be in vain. The crew listened in silence as his voice filled every room, calm, strong, unshaken. In the days that followed, the fleet began to repair itself. The engineers worked without rest. The Olaran survivors joined the humans on the flagship, their faces tired but grateful. They had seen something they never thought possible. The destruction of the enemy that had haunted their people for generations. They asked Hale what humanity would do next. He said they would rebuild and keep moving, because the galaxy was still vast and still full of danger. He told them that humanity did not fight for glory. They fought so that one day no one else would have to. As the ships drifted through the quiet void, the stars began to shine again. The dust from the battle slowly spread, forming a new light in the darkness. Hale stood alone in the observation room watching the stars one by one. He thought of the worlds they had saved, the allies they had found, and the lives they had lost. He knew the fight was not finished, but for the first time in years he felt something close to peace. He whispered that humanity had come far from the small blue world they once called home, and they would keep going until every shadow was gone, and beyond the silence. The faint echo of the destroyed swarm faded away into nothing.